Hello Internet, it's Daniel with Driving Dragons, back today with how you're doing it wrong playing 5th edition. Now, that's a little bit of a clickbaity title. I know there's already going to be some people jumping in the comment section with the goblins and sticks argument that don't bother to listen to the video and say, oh, everybody's playing it right, you can't be playing it wrong because it's just make-believe. That's a stupid argument. It's not really a rebuttal to anything that's being said, but hey, it got them to click on the video, so kudos to me for that one, I guess. Where this really comes from is when I did my interview with RPG Pundit, we missed, like any of those live events or live streams, you miss a few things. And I tried to go back and do a video where I went over a bunch of the questions I missed, and I missed the same question again. But it's a bigger question that I think requires a little bit more detail and a little bit more nuance. And that is, we were asked how we would fix, quote unquote, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons while maintaining compatibility with the way it works now, and aside from the obvious, which is removing a bunch of the woke nonsense and the social engineering that has come in, the social commentary that has been added in by Wizards of the Coast, just as a design exercise, not necessarily as a content of the rule books and way they flavor the classes and speak about things deal. So I figured that a video would be the way to do that. On the 280ZX, I am almost at a loss as I continue to fight to find the ignition issue. The relay has been replaced, the plugs and wires have been replaced, the distributor has been replaced from cap to bottom, from the distributor itself all the way up to the cap and the points. The ignition control module has been replaced. The ignition coil has been replaced twice. It's getting to the point where every single part of this ignition system has been replaced, and I'm still having trouble getting fire, which means I might be tracking down a short here soon, which is just one of the most annoying things you can do on a car, is trying to run down a short. But that may be what I have to do. In the meantime, we're also going to pick up some additional driving footage, and hopefully that'll tide us through, and then we'll get back to the 280. I may walk away from the ignition problem and go ahead and take care of brakes and suspension work and some other stuff like that in the meantime, just to keep things going and keep making progress. And maybe one of those situations where you walk away from a problem and come back later and the answer is obvious of what you missed. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get on, and I'm going to go ahead and lay some ground rules first for what I'm talking about when I say fix 5th edition. First thing you have to do is define what we're fixing and how we're fixing it, because when you fix something, it really means you're taking it and restoring it back to its original purpose or making it function better in that purpose, which means we have to acknowledge what 5th edition is as a game, and that is a super heroic fantasy game. It's not even really a tabletop role-playing game in the purest regard, because a tabletop role-playing game has a focus on playing a role. 5th edition doesn't really have that. 5th edition is focused on creating a super heroic persona for each player. It's not tabletop wargaming. It's not an adventure game. It's not even really a fantasy game. It is a superhero game that has a fantasy skin on top of it. That is really what 5th edition is. So as we move forward, we're going to make some adjustments to improve the actual gameplay and the game feel, and what I think might be correcting some critical issues. But what we're not trying to do is make it into some kind of OSR game or make it into some kind of new style of fantasy role-playing that emulates a particular play style. We're looking at it purely as, how do we make 5th edition better at what 5th edition is supposed to be? Now, I do have a bit of a disclaimer here. I am not the world's most experienced 5th edition Dungeon Master. I have played 5th edition. I have run 5th edition. I am familiar with the core rule books. Hell, I even read the Dungeon Master's Guide back when 5th edition first came out, and read it, and actually kind of looked at it, unlike some people who are supposed to be 5th edition experts. That being said, I went through 5th edition, immediately determined that it was not right for my table and for my player groups, that it was not the best system for us, that it did not enhance or support our playstyle. And then, of course, I had one very serious issue with 5th edition that is a design philosophy issue. And so 5th edition is not the thing that I have the world's greatest amount of experience with. As such, there's a couple of things that you need to know, some caveats about how I'm going to quote-unquote fix 5th edition with this video. The first is we're talking about the core base game and some overreaching design decisions and philosophies, not digging into the minutia of Jackass's bucket of all game-breaking nonsense or whatever book they've come out with. You're not going to find your Tasha's Cauldron of everything, because one of the major issues 5th edition has is Wizards of the Coast managed to actually introduce the concept of power creep into a tabletop role-playing game, which is kind of impressive in how bad it is. But the first thing you got to do is got to get rid of the power creep, because all you do when you have a power creep issue is every time a new book comes out, you just rush out and that replaces the quote-unquote meta for whatever came before it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. It piles on. It makes previous things a problem. And that's one of the first things that you have to get rid of. So most of these are going to be bigger, broader ideas and concepts, and not so much tweaking small individual rules on a very granular level. With that in mind, I'm going to start with what that issue is. Biggest problem I have with 5th edition is that 5th edition is player character focused as opposed to game master focused. You might say, well, why would you want it to be game master focused instead of player focused? Well, it makes it very difficult to take 5th edition and truly make a good playing system with it. Like, it's not a good system for generating good games. The reason is when you have game master focused mechanics and game master facing gameplay, what you end up with is a game master creates a game for people to play. And players who would like to play in that style of game come to that table and play. And everybody has a good time. Players who don't like that style don't play at that table. And when you have a game master for a group of friends, the game master inherently starts to adapt the game itself towards the style of play that those players want to have. The issue with 5th edition being player character focused or player focused in the sense of, when I say player in this case, I mean the people who play player characters, is it creates two primary issues. One, the game becomes focused on that player. I mean, it's right there in the description, player focused. But you have 4 or 5 co-equal players at that table in regards to player characters. Everybody's character has the same kind of importance to the story if you're playing narratively, has the same kind of positional authority if you're playing more as a tactical game or more of a tactical style, because it's clearly not a tactical game. No one player is really the focus. Focus comes from the results of the actions the players take in the game and the results of the situations that come up. Wizards of the Coast has managed to take this and, like I said before, he introduced power creep. And power creep just means that each new thing that comes out gives more toys to the players. And that's how they did it, is by making it a player character centric game. You're always looking for the next cool goodie to attach to your character. Well, when you do that and the whole game system and the whole ecosystem is focused around the player characters themselves, anytime you try to exclude rules or you try to alter different things or leave stuff out, that becomes an inherently targeted attack against a player who wants to run something specific. So when I say my world doesn't have XYZ race, the person who needs to optimize their character with XYZ race is now directly targeted, as opposed to me having created a world that everybody says, man, I can't wait to jump into this and be a part of it. It becomes well, you have now used rules to penalize my character and to thus penalize me. You can see this kind of thing throughout the decisions in 5th edition. And it works. I'm not going to get too deep into safety tools, as like I said, we're trying to stay away from the wokeness adjustments. But the biggest problem with safety tools, as I've mentioned before, is not the stated goal of what they're supposed to do, it's the direction they run. When you have a safety tool where it's the game master saying, hey, this is the kind of stuff that's going to be allowed at the table, this is the kind of stuff that's not, a player can look at it and make an informed decision. And that's it. When you have, it goes from game master to player. When it goes from player to game master and it becomes a thing like, well, I can just decide I don't like this X card, or here's my list of stuff you're allowed and not allowed to have. The problem you get is you now have 4 or 5 different sets of criteria being shoehorned into the game that the game master now has to adjust to, as opposed to one person saying, hey, here's what we're going to have. You have the choice on whether or not you want to conform to that. It makes it messier, it makes it sloppier, and it makes it where when the game master makes a change, now it's targeted at that one player. Because if I say, no, we're going to have this in the game, well, now I'm targeting that one guy's lines and bails or that one guy's issues. And now it makes it look like I'm attacking that one person. Whereas when it's game master focused and the game master is putting out what's going to be there, that player just says, oh, well, if he's going to have that kind of stuff, you know what, I'm just not interested in that. I'll show up for the next game instead of this one. Got to have the same thing in the design of the game itself. When we start talking about how do you play 5th edition right, how do you fix it, we got to look at this. This is all going to be trying to move things back to a world focus, and it's going to be moving things away from a player-centric. And a lot of times what we're going to do is we're just going to take a rule or take an alternate variant or something, and we're going to flip it around and make it world-facing as opposed to player-facing. I'm going to start that philosophy off with death saves. Anybody who has paid attention to complaints about 5th edition, especially from people like me, you knew death saves were going to be on the ticket here. We're going to take death saves and we're going to flip them around and make them work the opposite direction. Instead of this being a situation where if you fail a certain number of times, you fail 3 times, you're out. It's not going to be that way. We're going to take death saves and we're going to make it, there are 3 chances that you die. Okay? Your player character goes down. You have to make a death save. If you make it, that's okay. You're going to continue to be up, but the next round you're going to make another one. If you fail 1 time, you are out. This is going to change the dynamic in combat in 5th edition. It suddenly becomes a race to save that character. The other player characters now have to make the conscious decision to either continue the combat and not care about their comrade, step over to save their comrade, or now you have to make those heroic sacrifices. What's the heroic sacrifice? Man, I'm going to have to step aside to save this guy's life. He went down, my comrade went out. I have to make a sacrifice of what I'm doing in this system to move him. And I can't metagame this by saying, oh, he's got 3 death saves. He's got 3 death saves. Well, he's got to fail another one before it's a problem. So I know that if he fails this time, he'll be fine. So I can continue doing what I'm going to do in this round. Each round now becomes a decision that the player characters have to make of, do I step over here to try and save this guy? Do I not? This works really well in Cyberpunk Red, where death saves are a progressive mechanic. Once you're down, you're rolling to stabilize, and every round it gets harder. And if you run out, you're done. There's a ticking time clock on it because it's tied to your, it's actually tied to your body stat, where you have to roll under your body stat to stay alive, and it gets harder each round till eventually you just can't do it. So you're rolling a D10, you got a body stat of 10, okay, well fine, I know I'm going to roll the first one. And then the second one's probably going to be good because I just got to roll under 9, and then I got to roll under 8, and then I got to roll under 7, and then I got to roll under 6. It gets harder and harder and harder each step. Same thing should happen with these death saves. It's 1 death save and you're out, but I'm going to make it a situation where the player characters have to make a decision. So where do we get a bonus or a benefit for our Constitution score? That's real simple. You just like you have in the regular game, your death save is tied to your Constitution score. You can make a variant to make it more difficult each time, or you can simply say, hey, look, you've got to beat your Constitution score. You've got to roll under your Constitution score on a D20. Real simple. Uh-oh, I only have a 12 Constitution. There's a good chance that I die. And it's no longer I get to fail multiple times before it's finally over. So that's the first thing. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take the death saves. We're going to make them instead of making them a crutch that gives everybody an idea of how long they're going to be alive, how long they're going to be able to last, we're going to turn it into an impetus that drives character decisions and changes the nature of combat, as the other player characters now have to make decisions on whether or not they're going to abandon what they're doing or risk the life of their compatriot. The next mechanic that I'm going to mess with is going to be the rest mechanics. A big part of the problem with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that it takes away a lot of the stress and a lot of the danger that's involved in being in one of these adventures. And that's actually counterintuitive to the superheroic nature of the game. If you look at superhero comic books, superhero stories, they're not fun when the superhero's powers just automatically solve everything and their powers are automatically back. What makes the stories fun, what makes the movies interesting, what makes them work is when the powers are negated or limited and they can use their powers, but it's almost a puzzle on how they can do it, or they come across the person who has more power. So for instance, Lex Luthor with no superpowers is always Superman, who has essentially infinite powers. He's always a great villain that makes these great stories. Why? Because Lex Luthor constantly puts Superman in situations where his powers are not the instant answer. He puts him in situations where using his powers has a negative effect, or where he can't simply punch a hole through Lex Luthor's head to get what he needs done. He has to work around it. We need to do the same thing in the 5th edition tabletop role-playing game, and we do that with the rest mechanics. We have to get their resources under control. So the number one thing, first, no more automatic you're fully healed on long rests. Long rests are no longer you're automatically fully healed. I'm going to remove the hit die mechanic where you're spending hit die. I'm going to take that out entirely. We're going to simplify that. When you take a long rest, first, a long rest needs to be longer. It's no longer 8 hours, it's a day. But it has to be a day spent in a controlled environment, in a safe environment. It has to be not the kind of thing that's easily interrupted. It doesn't need to be in the middle of a dungeon. If it's in the middle of a dungeon, it's because there's a very specifically prepared location. For instance, this is where you get like when you're in the mega dungeon and we can conquer a series of rooms and now we have a perimeter. We can set up to take long rests. Long rest to me should be almost like convalescent care. So you have a full day, and in that full day, you get to roll your character's hit die plus their constitution modifier and recover that many hit points. That's it. If you have a D10 for your hit die, you get to roll a D10 plus your con mod. That is all the hit points that you get back on your long rest. Your long rest is going to restore spell slots, which we're going to get to spells in a minute because we're going to alter those as well. It's going to renew some of your abilities, but it's not going to be an instant restart till you have everything back. It's also going to be more restrictive in what you need to do. You need to have a very secure space to take this time. You could say a long rest is still 8 hours. I say it's 8 hours of sleep, 4 hours if you're an elf, and the other time is spent in preparing. This is where the fighter is repairing his armor. This is where the fighter is honing his sword and sharpening his weapons and working out the kinks and where he hurt himself and working out that sore muscle. This is where the spellcasters are preparing their spells and communing with their deity. Long rest should take a long time. It should not be something that's as easy as casting Tiny Hut and going and hiding inside. It needs to be something that is more difficult to get and has lower benefits. This is going to increase the ability of the Dungeon Master to provide meaningful encounters, and it's going to increase it's going to make it easier for him to balance those encounters out in terms of threat, and it's going to provide more urgency and more planning on the player characters so that they have to be more considerate of their actions and more considerate of their resources. Next up, we've got to take care of short rests. Short rests, this is going to be at least a 5 or 6 hour endeavor. You get your Constitution modifier back in hit points with a short rest. You get a die related to your character back in terms of resources. And this would be a situation where, like, perhaps a wizard gets their level in spell slots back. And when I say their level in spell slots, I mean like a 10th level wizard would get 10 levels of spell back. That could be 10 first level spots, 5 second level slots, 3 third level slots, and a first level slot. However the case may be, it's going to be restricted based on the character's class and the way their abilities work. There's a couple of things about this. We all have catching a second wind. We all have, rest and being able to go back out. But anybody who's ever done any kind of combat sports or any kind of contact sports, or really, you don't even have to do combat or contact sports, just a hard exercise situation. If you get up in the morning and you compete and then you rest and then you compete again at night, that's not the same as competing in the morning and then competing again at the end of the week, or competing again after a good full night's rest and a full day of getting back together. It's like those little injuries, those little ticks, those little expenditures, they're still there. Those muscles are still sore. They still have that lactic acid buildup. We don't have this short rest mechanic where we sit down outside a door for 5 minutes, take a couple of breaths, and it's like we're ready to go rock and roll again. I know that the Warlock class has some considerations on short rest, but really we've got to take away and take the piss out of 5e's ability to just constantly be at 100%, constantly be at your A game. So the first thing we do is we stretch that short rest out. The short rest now becomes our 4 or 5 hour sit down, lock up, barricade the doors and rest here in the dungeon thing. And it, once again, is severely limited. We are going to limit, we're going to take away that die roll for our hit point recovery. We are going to limit the amount of spells that we get back. And we're going to limit short rests to once per day. So the next thing we got to do here is we have to add some more flavor to combat, some more flavor to incidents. And this is going to be more than just combat. It's going to be really any damage dealing situation. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our hit points and we're going to divide them out into fifths. So you're going to divide your hit points by 5, and you're going to have your first fifth, second fifth, so on and so forth. If we have 20 hit points, it's every 5 hit points. We're going to add in additional effects for our first fifth, 2 fifths, 3 fifths, etc. If at any point in time you take 1/5 of your hit points in a single blow, you're going to be staggered. You're going to take a minus 2 or disadvantage on all rolls for the next round. This means you got rocked. If at any point you take 2/5, you are only going to be able to take partial actions the next round. If you take 3/5 in one blow, you are going to be unable to do anything other than move half your movement speed the next round. If you take 4/5 in a single blow, you are going to be unconscious for 1d6 rounds. These things are going to greatly enhance the thrill of combat by adding more impact to things that are happening. It's also going to help a lot by adding more that your fighters and your melee classes can do. That is the next little tweak that I'm going to make to the 5e rules, is adding consequences to taking large chunks of your hit points in single blows. Next changes for spellcasters. Spells are no longer just an automatic free save. They're no longer just an automatic cast. You now are going to have to roll a d20 plus your caster level plus the whatever attribute is for your class. So for instance, a wizard would be an intelligence check plus their caster level, and that has to exceed 10 plus the spell level. Period, end of story. That's how you cast spells. If you fail, it fizzles. If you succeed, it casts. You can even do this in a situation where if it succeeds with a critical success, so you got that natural 20 on the die, you don't use the spell slot. If you have a critical failure, not only do you lose the spell slot, but not only you fail to cast a spell and lose the spell slot, but maybe you lose 2 spell slots. Maybe it costs you a D4 spell slots if you have a critical miss. Or perhaps you have a magical misfire that can be adjusted per table. You can have a different dynamic for each one. The other slight spellcasting changes, there are no more free cantrips. Cantrips work just like the other spells. You're going to have to roll that 10 to get there. I mean, it's going to be easy because the DC is only going to be 10. So if you're a 5th level wizard with a 16 intelligence, all you got to do is roll a 2 or better and you're going to cast your light spell or whatever your cantrip is. But we're going to add this dynamic to give some more failure chance to our spellcasters. But hey, you got the benefit. There's now a benefit to a critical hit as a spellcaster. Okay, next we got to get something done about some of these races. One, we're going to severely restrict sub-races. And humans are going to have some revamp. You got to give them feats or something. Because the simple fact of the matter is that there's a radical imbalance in the classes in 5th edition. And here's part of what the change would have to be. We are no longer doing only bonuses on races. All races that get some sort of statistical bonus, so for instance, if you're +2 on Dex as an elf, you have to have a balanced minus. You just got to go back to the basic 3.5 edition Dungeons & Dragons chart, where it says that certain abilities are better than other abilities. So, for instance, you're going to have minuses to Charisma and Wisdom, for instance, to make up for a bonus to Constitution, because Constitution is so important. Same thing with Dex, whereas Strength and Dex might be equivalent. But we're going back to some racial minuses. You're not just getting benefits from picking something other than human. You're going to have trade-offs too. And, like I said, the sub-races are going to have to be severely restricted. They're way out of hand, and they really make it difficult. It was way better when these were templates. So, for instance, we're going to have to take Tiefling. We're going to have to take any kind of Denpeer, any type of Were anything, Lycans, anything of that nature. These are all going to have to go back into the templating system that we had with 3.5. Same deal with any kind of Drow or something like that where the sub-race has significant advantages. There's going to have to be a level adjustment added to these. You don't just get to be a tiefling and have a bunch of cool powers and stuff and then just be level 1 like everybody else. You're going to have to give up some levels to have those abilities. And that goes doubly so for anything that flies. Next change is going to be a change to the way experience is calculated and done. This is mainly to keep the focus on mission-based focus, on story-based focus, on plot focus, on objective-focused play, and away from trying to video game this out and grind it, or away from taking a character who's going to, say, try and focus on getting more experience points for themselves. And that is, we're not going to go to milestone leveling, we're not going to go to some kind of bulk assignment, but essentially experience points are now going to be based on the overall adventure and objective as a whole. It's no longer, I killed this many orcs, I stopped this demon, I took out this dragon, so I get these experience points. It is now, this entire adventure is worth this many experience points. If you are part of and complete the adventure, you get the experience points. Whether or not you did everything, as long as you completed the objectives, you get the experience points for resolving the situation. Same thing has to happen with social experience. There's a variant rules for it in the DMG. They should not be variant rules. You should have experience points assigned to everything you do in the game. And this is going to make it to where your traps and your puzzles and stuff now have more reward. because you actually are going to an encounter level system that is based on the adventure as a whole. If they're social encounters, you can do the individual social encounters. However, you also turn around and you have the mission-based or adventure-based. Hey, we're doing some kind of adventure in this town. Well, this whole thing is going to have experience points. And then we're going to tier those experience points so that if certain things are missed, like if you have the A to B, just get in and get it done. Don't do any of the extras, none of the side quests, none of the additional mission stuff, none of the exploration. We didn't find everything. We're going to get, say, 75% experience. If we beat it in kind of a normal way, we discover most of the stuff, we make all the logical decisions, we go through the majority of it, we kill most of the enemies and that sort of thing, we're going to get our full experience. And maybe we're going to get additional experience if we uncover special things, if we figure out additional problems, if we complete the mission or complete the adventure in a very advantageous way, if we're super completionists, something of that nature. But the point is that we're no longer saying, hey, we need to make sure we go in and clear every room and kill every orc and every goblin and stuff because we got to make sure we get all of our experience. The experience for the adventure is based on the adventure itself. This is going to streamline that, and it's going to keep us out of the video game mentality, and it's going to assist in keeping our players thinking as their character as opposed to as a player who is playing their character. Last but not least, the big thing that I think needs to come back to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in a big way is alignment needs to be a much more serious thing. First, as always, alignment must be black and white. There is no your good and my good, your law and my law. Good, evil, law, and chaos have very big, very firm and definitive definitions that are cosmically uniform. Good is good, period, end of story. It is the selfless behavior, it is self-sacrifice, it is giving to others. Good is good. Evil is evil. It is definitive, it is black and white. There are no shades of gray. However, keep in mind, alignment, 10,000 yard view. How do we make alignment more important? We got to go back to our restrictions. For one, Paladin is a lawful good class. Period, end of story. What about an Oathbreaker Paladin? An Oathbreaker Paladin is a paladin who loses his abilities for breaking his oath. Or you can have the Fallen Paladin variant, which is distinctly a paladin who turns away from good and becomes evil. Not neutral, not chaotic neutral, not lawful neutral, not he went to neutral good because he had problems with the system. He goes from good to evil. Okay? Druids need to be neutral. If you have to have that neutrality element for balance in nature. Bards cannot be lawful because it because lawful is not in line with the freedom-seeking nature of the creative. Barbarians cannot be lawful because they need to have the freedom and the rage. They can't be part of a lawful society because it takes away from their savagery. We need to go back to these alignment restrictions, and there need to be penalties assigned to breaking those alignments, because alignment it's not it's a straitjacket on every single decision. That's not what it is. It's a general behavior of the character. It's a general outlook on life. But there's two things. One, it's not just you have to be lawful good to be a paladin. It's you would never be a paladin if you were not lawful good in the first place. That is the mentality that leads somebody to wanting to be a paladin, not the other way around. A druid, to have that level of communion with nature, they're going to have a certain eye towards balance and neutrality as a person before they ever are willing to take those robes. If they're raised by the druid society and the druidic circle, and they're just a person who does not have any eye towards balance or any empathy towards it, they're just not going to be a druid. They're going to have to be something else, maybe a ranger. But we need to have these alignment restrictions added back in because they are another check on the way those players behave. They are another check on the way those players operate within the game world. They are another sacrifice that is made for the powers that are given. While we're at it, we got to do something about all these subclasses. I don't think the subclass system is all that great. I think it just leads to more min-maxing and more focus. if you want to be a circle of the whatever druid, you need to just look at the druid's ability list and find out how to best be that type of druid. So that's the last one, is we got to bring alignment back strong, and while we're at it, we need to curate these subclasses. So on a quick recap here, here's the changes that I would make to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that keep it compatible and actually make it work a little bit better for what it is. And this is outside of the esoteric of just, hey, we've got to be more game master focused, more world focused. These are actual material changes to the design of the game. One, alignment has to become far more focused. It's got to be more important, and it's got to have more consequences. Death saves need to be moved to a situation where they are progressive as opposed to something that gives you multiple chances, so that they enhance the feel and the excitement of combat, and they provide more meaningful changes to the rest of the players. We need to have some consequences for heavy damage. When you have so many hit points and your characters are so durable and so tough, we need to have ways that just taking a big hit has some consequences. We have to radically revamp the short rest and long rest mechanics, just so that they are more meaningful, more difficult to take, and provide more of a time crunch against the ability to recover resources. We need to take these races and we need to add minuses for these bonuses to balance them back out, so that there's choice that has a meaning. It's not simply a what bonuses do I want. It's an adjustment to, where you have to make some kind of sacrifice. You have to give in order to get. We're going to make some changes to spellcasters so that they're not just automatically getting what they want, automatically accessing those abilities. And not just spellcasters, we need to do that with bards and everything else too. That needs to be something you should have to roll when you use those abilities. That brings them back in line with the martial classes. And then of course we're going to change experience points to be more broad-based, not going all the way to milestone, but not ground down to the minutia of this many goblins, this many orcs, etc., etc. And that's just to keep the players mission and story focused, and less focused on how many goblin ears they got from the tavern, from the cave, or how many dragon scales they were able to collect in the Dragon Mountains. It needs to be about completing the mission, completing the objective, and less about just how much stuff you killed. Well guys, that's all I've got for how you're doing it wrong on 5th edition, how we can fix 5th edition to make it a better game overall as a superheroic fantasy game. You guys let me know where I missed and where I got it wrong in the comment section below. Like, share the video, subscribe, tell everybody about it. Get them all to come in here and tell me how I don't know the first damn thing about fixing 5th edition. And I'll see you guys next time.